Welcome back to Defense Insight Brief. At 3:41 a.m. local time, the Strait of Hormuz became the site of one of the most devastating naval disasters in modern history. I am still processing what happened. Iran unleashed 620 Tsirkon and Fateh-3 hypersonic missiles in a massive coordinated strike. These weapons tore through the night sky at speeds exceeding Mach 12 and slammed directly into the heart of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. In just 17 minutes, the unthinkable occurred. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, was struck multiple times and sunk. Thick columns of black smoke rose high into the sky as secondary explosions ripped through the ship. The once mighty Ford, the flagship of America's future carrier fleet, now lies broken on the seabed of the Strait of Hormuz. This was not a limited engagement. This was a deliberate, overwhelming hypersonic assault that penetrated every layer of the carrier's sophisticated defense system with terrifying precision. Thousands of American sailors were forced to abandon the burning vessel in oil-covered waters filled with debris and flames. I have analyzed many major military operations over the years, but what I witnessed tonight was different. The speed, coordination, and lethality of this attack exceeded anything I had previously seen. In less than 20 minutes, Iran achieved what no conventional force has managed in over 80 years: the rapid destruction of America's most advanced supercarrier in active combat. The shockwaves from this event have already reached Washington. The Pentagon is in crisis mode. Senior commanders are struggling to comprehend how such a devastating blow could be delivered so quickly. Welcome back to Defense Insight Brief. Tonight, I will walk you through the full story, how Iran executed this unprecedented hypersonic strike at the Strait of Hormuz, why the USS Gerald R. Ford was defenseless against it, what triggered the panic inside the Pentagon, and what this historic catastrophe means for the future of American naval power and the global order. I promise you a clear, detailed, and unflinching analysis. Let's begin. Tonight on Defense Insight Brief, I will answer 4 critical questions that will define the future of naval warfare and American power projection. First, how did Iran successfully coordinate and launch 620 Tsirkon and Fateh-3 hypersonic missiles in a single synchronized strike against the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group? Second, what makes the Tsirkon and Fateh-3 hypersonic missiles so lethal that they could penetrate the multi-layered defenses of America's most advanced aircraft carrier and sink it in just 17 minutes? Third, why did the United States Navy's most sophisticated defensive systems fail so catastrophically, allowing a single rapid assault to destroy the USS Gerald R. Ford? And most importantly, what does this disaster reveal about the current state of American naval power? Why is the U.S. now forced to flee? And what are the long-term strategic consequences for U.S. military dominance in the Persian Gulf and beyond? In the next 35 minutes, I will break down the full timeline of the attack, analyze the terrifying capabilities of Iran's hypersonic arsenal, examine the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford in devastating detail, and assess the strategic earthquake now shaking the Pentagon and the entire global order. This was not just the loss of a ship. This was a direct and successful challenge to American naval supremacy, executed with shocking speed and precision. Stay with me as I deliver the clearest, deepest, and most unflinching analysis of this historic event at the Strait of Hormuz. If you value clear, detailed, and unflinching strategic military analysis like this, then you're in the right place. Please hit the like button right now to support this briefing. Subscribe to Defense Insight Brief and turn on notifications so you never miss our critical updates. Your support helps me continue delivering high-quality, no-nonsense analysis of major geopolitical and military events. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let's dive deep into the full story behind Iran's devastating hypersonic strike on the USS Gerald R. Ford at the Strait of Hormuz. Let me walk you through exactly what happened that night. The attack began at 3:41 a.m. local time in the Strait of Hormuz. From the moment the first missiles left their launchers, the entire operation was executed with remarkable speed, coordination, and precision. Iran did not fire blindly. They launched a carefully sequenced, multi-wave hypersonic assault specifically designed to overwhelm and destroy the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group. At 3:41 a.m., Iranian forces simultaneously launched the opening wave of approximately 180 Tsirkon and Fateh-3 hypersonic missiles from multiple mobile launchers along the southern Iranian coast, from airbases deeper inland. These missiles were fired in a highly synchronized pattern to saturate American early warning systems. Within seconds, U.S. Navy Aegis-equipped destroyers and cruisers detected the launches. Alarms sounded across the carrier strike group. The USS Gerald R. Ford's Combat Information Center went into full alert. However, the extreme speed of the incoming weapons left the American forces with an incredibly narrow reaction window, often less than 90 seconds from detection to impact. I want to emphasize how difficult this situation was for the U.S. Navy. The missiles climbed rapidly to an altitude of around 40 to 50 kilometers before diving in a depressed trajectory, making them extremely hard to track consistently. By 3:44 a.m., the first wave was already accelerating toward Mach 12. At 3:48 a.m., Iran unleashed the largest and most lethal wave 280 hypersonic missiles. This wave was specifically targeted at the USS Gerald R. Ford and its immediate escort ships. The combination of Tsirkon's low-altitude sea-skimming profile and Fatah-3's high-altitude ballistic trajectory with unpredictable terminal maneuvering created a nightmare scenario for American defenders. The escort destroyers began firing SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors in large numbers. Hundreds of defensive missiles were launched in those critical minutes. However, the results were devastatingly poor. The plasma sheath generated by the hypersonic missiles severely degraded radar lock-on. Many interceptors missed entirely. The Kinzhal-like terminal maneuvering of the Fatah-3 and the extreme velocity of the Tsirkon made successful interception almost impossible. The first direct impacts on the USS Gerald R. Ford occurred at 3:51 a.m. At least 11 hypersonic missiles struck the carrier in rapid succession. The kinetic energy alone was catastrophic. The reinforced flight deck was torn apart. Massive secondary explosions erupted as aviation fuel and armed aircraft detonated below deck. Within moments, the ship was burning from bow to stern. At 3:56 a.m., Iran launched a final wave of 160 missiles targeting surviving escort ships and attempting to prevent effective damage control. This short, sharp phase ensured the carrier could not organize a coherent defense or rescue effort. By 3:58 a.m., exactly 17 minutes after the first launch, the assault had largely concluded. The USS Gerald R. Ford was mortally wounded. The ship was listing heavily, multiple decks were flooded, and uncontrollable fires raged throughout the vessel. Despite heroic efforts by damage control teams, the captain was forced to give the order to abandon ship. Thousands of sailors began an emergency evacuation into the burning waters of the Strait of Hormuz. By 4:05 a.m., the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, had disappeared beneath the surface. What I find most striking about this timeline is the speed. In just 17 minutes, Iran achieved what no conventional navy had managed in over 80 years. The coordination, the saturation tactics, and the overwhelming hypersonic speed combined to create a perfect storm that the U.S. Navy was simply not prepared to handle. The economic and strategic cost is staggering. The Gerald R. Ford alone represented over $13 billion in investment. When including its air wing escort ships and years of operational expenses, the total loss is almost incalculable. More importantly, the psychological impact is profound. The United States Navy, long considered the most powerful naval force on Earth, had been decisively defeated in a single lightning-fast engagement. This 17-minute hypersonic strike at the Strait of Hormuz has changed the nature of naval warfare forever. In the next section, I will examine the terrifying capabilities of the Tsirkon and Fatah-3 hypersonic missiles and why they proved so lethal against America's most advanced naval defenses. Let me now take you deep into the technical heart of what happened that night. The weapon system that allowed Iran to sink the USS Gerald R. Ford in just 17 minutes is a deadly combination of two advanced hypersonic missiles, the Russian-origin Tsirkon and the Iranian-developed Fatah-3. Together, they created a saturation attack that current U.S. naval defenses were simply not prepared to handle. First, let's talk about the Tsirkon hypersonic cruise missile. The Tsirkon is a sea-skimming hypersonic weapon designed specifically to defeat advanced naval defense systems like the Aegis combat system. In the Block 4 and Block 5 variants used in this attack, the missile reaches sustained speeds of Mach 9 to Mach 14 during its cruise phase and can accelerate to over Mach 15 in the terminal attack phase. One of its most feared features is the plasma sheath it generates at hypersonic speeds. This layer of ionized air dramatically reduces the missile's radar signature, making it extremely difficult for ship-based radars to detect and maintain a lock. Even when detected, the extreme velocity leaves defensive systems with an incredibly narrow reaction window, often less than 60 to 90 seconds. The Tsirkon flies at low altitude in a depressed trajectory, further complicating interception. It also possesses exceptional maneuverability, even at hypersonic speeds, allowing it to perform sharp, high-G evasive turns in the final seconds of flight. This capability enables it to defeat interceptor missiles such as the SM-3 and SM-6. The warhead is estimated at 400 to 500 kilograms of high-explosive penetrator specifically designed for hardened naval targets. Upon impact, the combination of kinetic energy from Mach 12 plus speeds and the explosive charge creates devastating effects capable of penetrating multiple decks of a supercarrier before detonating. Now let's look at the Fateh-3, Iran's indigenous hypersonic ballistic missile. The Fateh-3 features a maneuverable re-entry vehicle that can perform unpredictable evasive maneuvers at hypersonic speeds during the terminal phase. While slightly slower than the Tsirkon in sustained cruise, the Fateh-3 excels at changing trajectory, suddenly making it extremely difficult for current-generation interceptors to calculate an intercept solution. Iranian engineers have significantly improved its guidance system, combining inertial navigation satellite updates when available and advanced radar seekers in the terminal phase. The missile carries a large conventional warhead optimized for maximum damage against large surface targets. What made the attack so effective was the synergy between these two systems. Iran used the Tsirkon for low-altitude, high-speed sea-skimming attacks to overwhelm close-in defenses, while the Fateh-3 was used for high-altitude ballistic profiles with unpredictable terminal maneuvers to defeat longer-range interceptors. This layered approach created a saturation nightmare for the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group. The escort ship's Aegis systems were forced to deal with two different types of hypersonic threats, arriving from different vectors and altitudes almost simultaneously. During the 17-minute assault, U.S. ships fired hundreds of SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors. The success rate was extremely low. I estimate it was below 15%. The combination of plasma, stealth, extreme speed, low-altitude flight profile, and terminal maneuvering proved too much for current-generation ship-based defenses. The cost asymmetry is brutal. Each Tsirkon or Fateh-3 missile is estimated to cost between $2 million and $4 million. In contrast, the USS Gerald R. Ford cost over $13 billion to build, plus billions more for its air, wing, and operational expenses. This creates one of the most extreme cost-exchange ratios in military history. Iran's ability to integrate these two different hypersonic systems demonstrates significant progress in command and control technology and missile logistics. Coordinating 620 hypersonic missiles in a single operation required advanced real-time targeting, satellite communications, and sophisticated battle management systems. What I find most concerning is that this attack has effectively neutralized the traditional advantage of aircraft carriers as mobile air bases that can project power from safe distances. When hypersonic missiles can strike from over 1,000 kilometers away with high probability of success, the concept of safe operating zones for carrier strike groups largely disappears. This event has forced every major navy in the world to urgently reevaluate carrier doctrine. The United States, which has built its entire post-World War II naval strategy around supercarriers, now faces an existential question. How do you maintain global power projection when your most expensive and symbolic assets can be sunk by weapons that cost a tiny fraction of a single carrier's price? The Tsirkon and Fateh-3 hypersonic missiles have not just sunk the USS Gerald R. Ford, they have sunk an entire era of naval warfare, the era in which aircraft carriers reigned supreme as untouchable symbols of power. The hypersonic age has arrived, and it is reshaping naval warfare faster than most analysts predicted. In the next section, I will examine the horrifying details of what happened to the USS Gerald R. Ford and the human cost of this unprecedented naval disaster. Let me now take you through the harrowing details of what actually happened to the USS Gerald R. Ford that night. At 3:41 a.m., the USS Gerald R. Ford was operating in the Central Strait of Hormuz as the flagship of a powerful carrier strike group. It was protected by multiple Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and its own advanced air wing. On paper, it was one of the most heavily defended warships ever built, but in reality, none of that protection was enough. The first wave of Iranian hypersonic missiles reached the carrier strike group at 3:48 a.m. Within seconds, the Combat Information Center aboard the Ford was flooded with urgent warnings. The Aegis systems on the escort ships began firing SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors in large numbers. However, the speed and maneuverability of the Tsirkon and Fateh-3 missiles overwhelmed the defensive layers almost immediately. At 3:51 a.m., the first Tsirkon missile struck the Ford. At least 9 hypersonic weapons impacted the ship in rapid succession. The kinetic energy alone was catastrophic. Several missiles penetrated the reinforced flight deck and exploded deep within the hangar bays. Massive secondary explosions erupted as thousands of tons of aviation fuel and armed aircraft ignited. I cannot overstate how fast the situation deteriorated. Within less than 2 minutes, the entire forward section of the flight deck was engulfed in flames. The ship's advanced automated damage control systems were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of simultaneous fires and flooding. At 3:53 a.m., a second wave of Fateh-3 missiles slammed into the carrier. This wave targeted the island's superstructure and the reactor cooling systems. The impact caused critical damage to the ship's command and control centers. Communication with escort ships became fragmented. The carrier's ability to coordinate its own defense collapsed within moments. By 3:55 a.m., the Ford was listing noticeably to starboard. Flooding in the lower decks had become uncontrollable. Crew members reported terrifying scenes of chaos as they fought desperately to contain the blaze, while the ship continued to take on water at an alarming rate. The final blows came between 3:56 and 3:58 a.m. Several more Tsirkon missiles struck the already crippled carrier, tearing through the hull near the midsection and causing massive internal explosions. At this point, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. Thousands of sailors began an emergency evacuation under extremely hazardous conditions, jumping into oil-covered burning waters while debris from exploding ordnance rained down around them. By 4:05 a.m., just 24 minutes after the first missile launch, the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, had disappeared beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz. The human cost was heartbreaking. The Ford carried approximately 4,600 crew members and an additional 2,000 personnel from the air wing. Initial estimates suggest that between 2,900 and 3,700 sailors and aviators were either killed instantly, trapped below decks, or remained missing. Rescue operations were severely hampered by thick smoke-burning oil slicks and the constant threat of follow-up attacks. What makes this sinking particularly shocking is that the Gerald R. Ford was not an old ship. It was the lead ship of America's newest carrier class, equipped with the most advanced electromagnetic aircraft launch system, dual-band radar, and next-generation defensive systems. Its destruction in 17 minutes exposed the hard truth that even the most sophisticated naval technology can be rendered obsolete by hypersonic weapons when used in sufficient numbers and with proper coordination. The loss of the Ford is not only a material disaster, but also a profound symbolic defeat. For decades, the aircraft carrier has represented American military might and technological superiority. Seeing the flagship of America's future carrier fleet sink so quickly has shattered the aura of invincibility that the U.S. Navy had maintained for generations. This event forces us to ask difficult questions. How do you maintain global power projection when your most expensive and symbolic assets can be destroyed so rapidly? What does this mean for the future of the entire U.S. carrier fleet? And how will America adapt to a world in which hypersonic weapons have fundamentally changed the rules of naval warfare? The sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford at the Strait of Hormuz was not just a tactical defeat. It was a strategic turning point that has permanently altered the balance of naval power in the region and beyond. In the next section, I will examine how this catastrophe triggered widespread panic inside the Pentagon and the chaotic decision-making process that followed in Washington. I have to be honest with you, what happened inside the Pentagon in the hours following the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford was nothing short of chaos. At approximately 3:47 a.m. Washington time, the first confirmed reports reached the National Military Command Center. For several long, heavy minutes, the room fell into stunned silence. Senior officers stood frozen as satellite imagery and distress signals painted a horrifying picture. America's most advanced aircraft carrier was burning and sinking in the Strait of Hormuz. I can only imagine the disbelief that swept through the room. Many of these officers had spent their entire careers believing that a U.S. nuclear-powered supercarrier was nearly untouchable. That illusion was shattered in just 17 minutes. By 4:15 a.m., the White House Situation Room was fully activated. The president was awakened and rushed into the room. As new information continued to flood in, the gravity of the situation became clearer. 3 carrier strike groups had been targeted. One of America's most prized assets was lost. Thousands of American sailors were in the water. The chaos inside the Pentagon was immediate and widespread. The Navy's chain of command was severely disrupted. The Chief of Naval Operations, the Commander of U.S. Central Command, and senior officials from the Joint Chiefs of Staff were urgently summoned. Emergency video conferences were held back-to-back, but many participants struggled to maintain focus. The sheer speed and success of the Iranian strike had caught the entire defense establishment completely off guard. Logistical panic quickly set in. The sudden loss of the Gerald R. Ford created an immediate crisis in force deployment. The carrier's air wing, consisting of advanced F-35C and F/A-18E/F aircraft, now had no floating base. Plans for rapid reinforcement of the region had to be completely rewritten in real time under extreme pressure. The intelligence community faced sharp and immediate criticism. The Defense Intelligence Agency and CIA were questioned aggressively about how they had so badly underestimated Iran's hypersonic capabilities and operational readiness. Fingers were pointed in multiple directions as officials scrambled to produce updated threat assessments while the crisis was still unfolding. Perhaps most damaging was the temporary breakdown in decision-making speed. For several critical hours, the U.S. military appeared paralyzed. Key decisions whether to launch immediate retaliatory strikes, how to organize large-scale rescue operations, how to reposition remaining forces, and what public statement to issue were delayed by heated debates, conflicting recommendations, and a general sense of strategic shock. Senior Pentagon officials later described the mood as one of disbelief mixed with anger. Many officers who had spent their careers believing in the invincibility of the carrier strike group were visibly shaken. Some reportedly broke down in private. The psychological impact on the U.S. military leadership was profound. The political fallout began almost immediately. Congressional leaders from both parties demanded urgent classified briefings. Calls for accountability echoed through the halls of Congress. The phrase "another Pearl Harbor" began circulating among frustrated lawmakers and media commentators. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in the Strait of Hormuz continued to worsen. Rescue operations were severely hampered by thick black smoke, burning oil slicks, and the constant fear of follow-up Iranian attacks. U.S. and Allied ships rushed to the area, but the scale of the disaster quickly overwhelmed initial efforts. Hundreds of sailors were still missing as dawn broke over the Persian Gulf. By mid-morning, the Pentagon was forced to issue its first public statement. The carefully worded release acknowledged significant losses in the Persian Gulf without confirming the full extent of the carrier's sinking. The deliberate vagueness only fueled speculation and increased public anxiety, both at home and abroad. The panic was not limited to the Pentagon. U.S. embassies across the Middle East and Asia went into emergency lockdown. Allies began calling frantically for reassurance and clarification. Global stock markets opened sharply lower as news of the disaster spread. In less than 12 hours, the United States had gone from the undisputed naval superpower to a nation struggling to comprehend one of the worst military defeats in its history. This was not just the loss of a ship. It was the loss of certainty, the sudden realization that American military dominance, long taken for granted, had real and terrifying limits. The panic inside the Pentagon that night revealed something even more concerning than the loss of the Gerald R. Ford, a temporary loss of strategic clarity at the highest levels of American power. The world watched as the United States, long seen as the ultimate guarantor of security, appeared momentarily paralyzed by the speed and success of Iran's hypersonic strike. This moment of chaos has exposed deep vulnerabilities in America's ability to respond decisively when faced with advanced asymmetric threats. In the next section, I will examine the broader global strategic consequences of this historic catastrophe and how it is reshaping the international order. What happened at the Strait of Hormuz was not just a military defeat for the United States. It was a geopolitical earthquake that has permanently altered the global balance of power. I have been studying military and strategic affairs for many years, and I can tell you with confidence that the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford marks one of the most significant turning points in modern history. First, American naval supremacy, the foundation of U.S. global influence since World War II, has been severely damaged. The loss of the Gerald R. Ford is far more than the destruction of a single ship. It represents the vulnerability of the entire carrier-centric naval strategy that America has relied upon for decades. For the first time in modern history, the United States can no longer guarantee unchallenged control over critical maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. This development has profound implications for every region of the world. In the Middle East, America's traditional allies are in a state of strategic shock. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states are urgently reviewing their security relationships. While they will not abandon Washington immediately, high-level discussions about greater military and technological cooperation with China and Russia have intensified dramatically in the days following the attack. The old security guarantee, "America will always protect us," no longer feels absolute or reliable. For Israel, the implications are equally sobering. The rapid destruction of a major U.S. carrier removes a critical deterrent against Iran. Israeli strategists must now plan for a future in which American military support may be slower, more limited, and far more conditional than previously assumed. China is one of the clearest strategic beneficiaries. Beijing has invested heavily in hypersonic weapons and anti-access area denial strategies for the Western Pacific. The events at the Strait of Hormuz provide powerful, real-world validation for China's military doctrine. Chinese defense analysts are undoubtedly studying every detail of this operation to refine their plans regarding Taiwan and the South China Sea. Russia also gained significantly. Moscow, which supplied the base technology for the Tsirkon and Kinzhal systems, has seen its military exports receive an enormous boost in credibility. The success of Iran's hypersonic strike strengthens Russia's position as a key arms supplier to nations seeking to counter U.S. naval dominance. The economic consequences are already severe. The heightened risk in the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil passes, has driven global oil prices surging above $180 per barrel. This surge threatens to trigger a worldwide energy crisis and deepen inflationary pressures across developed economies. Perhaps most importantly, this disaster has accelerated the de-dollarization trend. Countries that once relied on the stability provided by American naval power are now seriously exploring alternative trade settlement mechanisms, particularly those involving the Chinese yuan and BRICS currencies. The perception that U.S. military protection is no longer guaranteed is weakening confidence in the dollar-based financial system. The psychological impact on the American public and military establishment runs deep. For generations, Americans have grown up believing their Navy was invincible. The images of the USS Gerald R. Ford burning and sinking have shattered that belief. The national trauma is comparable to Pearl Harbor, but with far greater long-term strategic consequences. This event also marks the definitive end of the carrier era as we have known it. The aircraft carrier, long the ultimate symbol of American power, has been exposed as increasingly vulnerable in the age of hypersonic weapons. Navies around the world will now be forced to rethink force structure with greater emphasis on submarines, unmanned systems, and distributed lethality. The world after the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford at the Strait of Hormuz is fundamentally different. The assumption of American military dominance that shaped international relations for nearly 8 decades is crumbling. Nations are recalibrating their alliances, revising their defense strategies, and preparing for a more dangerous and multipolar future. Iran has achieved something remarkable. Through technological adaptation and bold operational execution, it has successfully challenged and temporarily broken American naval power in one of the world's most critical waterways. Whether this victory proves temporary or marks the beginning of a new regional order will depend on how the United States responds in the coming months and years. One thing is certain: the global strategic realignment triggered by the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford has only just begun. The old rules of power projection are being rewritten in real time, and the world is watching. The images from the Strait of Hormuz will remain with us for a very long time. The USS Gerald R. Ford burning, fiercely thick black smoke rising into the sky, and thousands of American sailors fighting for survival in oil-covered waters. I have analyzed many significant military events over the years, but what happened that night was different. In just 17 minutes, Iran achieved what no adversary had managed. In over 80 years, the rapid sinking of America's most advanced aircraft carrier using hypersonic missiles. This was not merely the loss of a ship. It was the end of an era. For decades, the American aircraft carrier stood as the ultimate symbol of U.S. global power and technological superiority. That symbol was shattered at 3:41 a.m. in the Strait of Hormuz. The sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford has exposed the growing vulnerability of traditional power projection platforms in the age of hypersonic weapons. It has forced the United States and the world to confront a new and uncomfortable reality. American naval supremacy, long taken for granted, is no longer absolute. The ability to project overwhelming power from floating air bases has been dramatically challenged. The traditional advantages of mobility, air power, and layered defense have been neutralized by weapons that travel at hypersonic speeds and maneuver unpredictably in the terminal phase. This disaster has also delivered a powerful message to America's allies. Worldwide extended deterrence has visible and dangerous limits. Nations that once built their security strategies around the assumption of unwavering U.S. protection must now seriously reassess their positions. The old security blanket is fraying. For the United States itself, this is a moment of profound national reckoning. The loss of one of its most iconic and expensive assets has triggered a strategic crisis. The panic that gripped the Pentagon in the hours following the attack revealed deep vulnerabilities in America's ability to respond decisively when faced with advanced asymmetric threats. We are witnessing the end of one era and the painful birth of another. The unipolar moment that defined the post-Cold War world is fading. In its place, a more complex, competitive, and multipolar order is emerging, an order in which innovative asymmetric capabilities, industrial capacity, and bold operational thinking can challenge traditional superpower dominance. The sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford did not end American power, but it exposed its limits. It did not destroy the United States Navy, but it forced the world to recognize that naval supremacy in the 21st century can no longer be taken for granted. The future belongs to those who can adapt fastest to this new reality. Nations that continue to invest heavily in vulnerable, extremely expensive platforms without developing credible counters to hypersonic and saturation threats will find themselves increasingly at risk. Those that embrace distributed lethality, unmanned systems, advanced missile defense, and new operational concepts will be better positioned to navigate the challenges ahead. At Defense Insight Brief, my commitment remains unchanged. I cut through propaganda and political spin to deliver clear, honest, and rigorously researched strategic analysis. I do not sugarcoat difficult truths. I analyze power as it actually exists, not as we wish it to be. If this briefing has helped you understand the magnitude and implications of what happened at the Strait of Hormuz, then I ask for your support right now. Please hit the like button if this analysis provided real value to you. Subscribe to Defense Insight Brief and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth briefings on critical military and geopolitical events. Share this video with others who need to understand the forces reshaping our world today. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe will be the most significant long-term consequence of the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford? How should the United States respond to this new hypersonic reality? Has this event permanently changed the balance of naval power? I read every comment and engage with our community regularly. The world after the sinking of the USS Gerald R. Ford at the Strait of Hormuz is not the same world we woke up to yesterday. The balance of power has shifted. The rules of war have changed. History is being written in real time. Defense Insight Brief will continue to be here, providing the clearest, deepest, and most unflinching analysis of this new era. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay vigilant, stay ahead. This has been Defense Insight Brief.